Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I came home 2 days early to surprise my wife. That was the plan. I had spent 3 weeks traveling across the state managing a chain of restaurant openings for the company I worked for. Sophie had been complaining for months that I was always gone, always working, always chasing the next project. So I decided to do something different. Her birthday was 3 days away. I had booked a private dinner at her favorite waterfront restaurant. I had bought her a necklace she'd been looking at for months. I even stopped at a bakery on the drive home and picked up her favorite chocolate cake. I parked quietly in the driveway around 8 o'clock. The house looked normal. The lights were on. Her car was there. Nothing seemed off. Until I walked through the front door. The first thing I noticed was a man's leather jacket hanging on the back of a dining room chair, not mine. I stood there for a second. Maybe a friend had stopped by. Maybe her brother. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Then I noticed a second coffee mug on the kitchen counter, still warm. I set the cake down, slowly, carefully. The house was quiet except for faint voices coming from upstairs. A man laughing, then Sophie laughing. Not the laugh she used with neighbors, not the laugh she used with family. I knew that laugh. I walked through the living room. A phone sat face down on the couch. Expensive, definitely not mine. I picked it up. No lock screen. Whoever owned it hadn't expected trouble. The screen lit up immediately. The wallpaper showed a man standing beside two young girls at a baseball game. A text notification appeared. The message preview made me stop walking. "Are you coming home tonight or are you working late again? Emily keeps asking where you are." A minute later, another message appeared. "Please don't miss another family dinner." I stared at the screen. The contact name was Rachel. Wife, I assumed. I looked toward the staircase. The voices were still upstairs, still laughing, still comfortable. That told me everything. This wasn't the first time. I opened the phone's recent messages. The very first conversation at the top was with Sophie. Hundreds of messages, photos, plans, months of history. I didn't recognize the man from the wallpaper. But when I opened his company profile from an email sitting in his inbox, I felt my jaw tighten. I knew exactly who he was. And suddenly, this situation became much bigger than an affair. The man upstairs wasn't a stranger. His name was Nathan Turner, and 6 months earlier, I'd helped save his career. For a few seconds, I just stood there looking at Nathan Turner's phone. 6 months earlier, he'd been one bad decision away from losing his position as regional director for a restaurant group my company partnered with. I'd vouched for him, personally. I remembered sitting in a boardroom arguing that he deserved another chance after a costly mistake. Now he was upstairs with my wife. I wasn't angry anymore. Not yet. I was focused. I walked into my home office and closed the door. Then I started working. I forwarded screenshots to myself, messages, photos, hotel reservations, weeks of conversations. There was enough evidence to fill a book. One message caught my attention. Nathan had written, "Dylan still thinks you're the perfect wife. It's almost too easy." I took a screenshot of that one too. Then I found Rachel's number. I pressed call. She answered after 3 rings. "Hello?" Her voice sounded tired. I looked at the ceiling for a second before speaking. "Rachel Turner?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Dylan Walker." Silence. Then she said, "Okay, I think we need to talk." The hesitation in her voice disappeared. "What happened?" I got straight to the point. "Your husband is at my house." A pause. Then a nervous laugh. "What?" "He's with my wife." Nothing. Complete silence. Finally, she said, "No. I'm looking at his phone right now." "You're mistaken." "I wish I was." Another long silence followed. I heard her breathing change. Fast. Uneven. "He told me he had a meeting in River County. He's in my bedroom." She didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. When she finally did, her voice sounded completely different. "How long?" "I don't know yet." "I do." That surprised me. "What do you mean?" Rachel let out a bitter laugh. 3 months ago, I found messages. He convinced me it was over. I leaned back in the chair. So this wasn't new. Not for her. "He promised counseling," she continued. "Promised he'd stop." He didn't. No. The voices upstairs were getting louder now. Movement. Footsteps. Still no idea I was home. Rachel suddenly said, "Dylan, there's something you need to know." "I'm listening." "The affair isn't the biggest problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He got promoted 4 months ago." Yeah, he wasn't supposed to. Why not? Because somebody in corporate was investigating him. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Investigating him for what? Rachel answered immediately. For having inappropriate relationships with employees. I looked back down at the phone in my hand, then at the staircase outside my office. The situation had just changed. This wasn't one bad choice. This was a pattern. And upstairs, completely unaware, Nathan Turner was about to have the worst night of his life. I thanked Rachel for the information and ended the call. Then I walked out of the office and sat down in a chair facing the staircase. I didn't hide. I didn't pace around the house. I simply waited. About 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps. 2 sets, then laughter. The kind of laughter people share when they think they're safe. Sophie appeared first. Nathan was right behind her. The moment she saw me, she froze. Nathan nearly walked into her. The smile disappeared from his face instantly. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Sophie spoke. "Dylan?" I nodded. "Good. At least you still recognize me." Her face went pale. Nathan recovered first. He stepped forward. "Look, man," I raised a hand. "Don't." He stopped talking. "I've listened to enough lies for one night." Sophie swallowed hard. "When did you get home?" "A little over an hour ago." The color drained from her face. An hour. That meant I'd been there long enough to know everything. Nathan looked toward the front door. I noticed. So did Sophie. I stood up. Not aggressively. Just enough to make it clear I wasn't going anywhere. Neither were they. "Sit down." Neither moved. I smiled. That wasn't a suggestion. A few seconds later, they sat on the couch. I stayed standing. Nathan tried again. "Dylan, this isn't—" I cut him off. "If you say it's not what it looks like, I'm throwing you out of my house before you finish the sentence." His mouth closed. "Good choice." I looked at Sophie. "How long?" She stared at the floor. "Dylan, how long?" 5 months. Nathan immediately looked at her. She looked back. Wrong answer. I already knew that. "Interesting," I said. "Because your messages go back almost 8. Neither of them spoke. I pulled out my phone. Their faces changed the second they realized what that meant. I copied everything. Nathan's confidence cracked. "What do you mean, everything?" "Messages, photos, hotel bookings, deleted conversations. Everything." His face tightened. Sophie looked like she might be sick. I stepped closer. "Here's the part I find funny." Nobody answered. "You both spent months lying to me." I looked directly at Nathan. "And somehow, neither of you noticed that I make a living negotiating contracts worth millions of dollars." The room stayed silent. "You really thought you'd be better at hiding things than I would be at finding them?" Nathan looked away first. That told me everything. Sophie finally found her voice. "Dylan, please let me explain." "No." The word hit the room hard. "No explanations." "Dylan, you made your choices already." I reached into my jacket pocket. "And before either of you starts rewriting history, you should know something." Both of them looked at me. I pulled out a second phone and held it up. Nathan frowned. Sophie stared at it. "I've been recording this entire conversation." Nathan's eyes widened. Sophie's face went completely white. "Every word you've said since you came downstairs." Nobody spoke. "So, if either of you decides to tell a different version of tonight later, don't." And suddenly, neither of them knew what to say next. For the first time that night, Nathan looked nervous. Real nervous. Not the kind of nervous a man gets when he's caught cheating. The kind he gets when he realizes the situation is much bigger than he thought. Sophie noticed it too. She looked at him, then back at me. "Dylan, what are you planning to do?" I reached for a folder on the side table. While they were upstairs, I'd printed a few screenshots, copied down a few names, and put together a quick timeline. Nothing complicated, just facts. Nathan stared at it. "What is that?" "Evidence." His jaw tightened. "Evidence of what?" I slid one page across the coffee table. He picked it up. The confidence disappeared from his face immediately. Sophie leaned over and looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Nathan?" He didn't answer. I did. 3 company credit card charges. The room stayed quiet. 2 hotel stays. I pointed at the paper. 1 luxury resort weekend. Nathan finally spoke. "That doesn't prove anything. It proves company money was used." His eyes narrowed. I could almost see him calculating. trying to figure out what else I knew. The answer was simple, more than he wanted. Sophie looked confused. What is he talking about? I looked at her. The romantic weekend you thought Nathan paid for? She said nothing. The one last month near the lake? Her eyes widened. Then she slowly turned toward him. Nathan? Still nothing. I answered again. He charged it to a corporate account. The silence that followed was brutal. Sophie wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at him. Really looking at him. Maybe for the first time. You told me you paid for that yourself. Nathan shifted in his seat. It wasn't like that. I laughed. It was exactly like that. Then I pulled another paper from the folder and placed it on the table. This one hit harder. Rachel's name was at the top. Nathan saw it immediately. His face dropped. What is that? Sophie asked. A statement. Nathan stood up. Don't. I smiled. There it is. What? The first smart thing you've said all night. Sophie grabbed the paper before he could stop her. She started reading. Halfway down, she stopped. Then she looked at him. You cheated on your wife before me? Nathan didn't answer. That was answer enough. I watched Sophie's expression change. Shock, confusion, disbelief. She'd spent months helping destroy our marriage for a man she thought was different. Now she was learning she wasn't special. She was just next. I let that sink in for a moment. Then I looked directly at Nathan. You know what's funny? He didn't respond. I haven't contacted your company yet. The blood drained from his face. Yet. That was the word that mattered. And before you ask, I continued, yes, I already spoke with an attorney. Sophie looked up sharply. Nathan's shoulders dropped. For the first time all night, neither of them looked like they had control of anything. And I was just getting started. Nathan sat back down slowly. The fight was starting to leave him. Not because he felt guilty, because he finally understood there was no easy way out. Sophie looked exhausted. The confidence she'd carried downstairs was gone. She kept staring at the papers in her hands. Every few seconds, she'd glance at Nathan as if she were seeing a different man. Maybe she was. I checked the time. Then I picked up my car keys. Both of them looked at me. Dylan, where are you going? Sophie asked. Out. What does that mean? It means I'm not spending another minute in this house with either of you. Nathan finally found his voice. What exactly do you want? I looked at him. A divorce. I looked at Sophie. And distance. Then I looked back at Nathan. And for you, consequences. Nobody spoke. I walked to the front door. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. You should probably start calling lawyers. Then I left. The next morning, things started moving fast, faster than either of them expected. I met with my attorney, Michael Donovan, a man I'd known for years. By noon, divorce papers were being prepared. By evening, financial protections were already in place. Nothing illegal, nothing sneaky, just smart planning. The kind of planning people do when they see reality clearly. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Rachel. Thought you'd want an update. I'm listening. Nathan's company suspended him. That was quick. What happened? Internal audit. I smiled slightly. Apparently, someone inside the company had started asking questions after receiving an anonymous package. I never told Rachel where that package came from. She never asked. Nathan's panicking, she said. I'm sure he is. There's more. I waited. The investigation uncovered previous complaints. The same thing she'd hinted at before, only now there was proof. Former employees were talking. Human resources was involved. People who had stayed quiet for years were suddenly speaking up. A week later, Nathan was terminated. Not suspended, not demoted. Gone. The local business journal picked up the story. Then another publication did. Then another. His reputation started falling apart in public. Meanwhile, Sophie kept calling. Voicemail after voicemail. I didn't answer. Not once. Then, 3 weeks after I walked out of the house, she sent a final message. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was a request. She wanted one meeting, one conversation, one chance to explain everything. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I agreed. Because there was one thing I still wanted. The truth. I agreed to meet Sophie the following Friday. Not at our house. That place was finished. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the river, halfway across town. I arrived first. 10 minutes later, Sophie walked in. She looked different. Not because of her clothes, not because of her appearance. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from watching your decisions catch up to you. She sat down across from me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "You said you wanted to explain." She looked down at her coffee, then back at me. "It started at work. Our companies partnered on several projects, and we spent a lot of time together." I said nothing. Nathan paid attention to me. Still nothing. He listened when I complained. I leaned back. "And that was enough?" Her eyes dropped. "No." "Then what was enough?" She hesitated. "The truth? That's usually a good place to start." She exhaled slowly. I liked the attention. At least it was honest. For the first time since we'd sat down, I believed what she was saying. He made me feel important. I nodded. "And risking our marriage felt worth it?" Tears appeared in her eyes. She didn't deny it. That told me everything. After a moment, she said quietly, "I never thought you'd find out." There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. Not, "I never wanted to hurt you." Not, "I made a mistake." Just the truth. She thought she'd get away with it. I looked at her for several seconds. Then I spoke. "Do you know what bothers me most?" She shook her head. "It isn't the affair." She looked surprised. "It's the disrespect." I leaned forward. "You lied to my face for months." She started to speak. I raised a hand. She stopped. "You sat across from me at dinner. You made plans with me. You looked me in the eye every day." I held her gaze. "And all that time you thought I was too blind to notice." She looked away, because she knew I was right. Then she surprised me. "There is something else." My expression didn't change. "I'm listening." She hesitated. "Nathan wasn't the first man who tried." That got my attention. "What does that mean?" Her hands tightened around the coffee cup. "For almost 2 years, he wasn't the only person flirting with me." I frowned. "Go on." She swallowed hard. "There were messages." "From who?" "Clients, managers, vendors." I stared at her. "And?" She looked miserable. I liked it. The honesty was brutal. Then she delivered the part she clearly hadn't wanted to say. Eventually, I stopped feeling guilty about it. The table went silent. Because that wasn't a mistake. That was a mindset. And suddenly I realized our marriage had started ending long before Nathan Turner ever showed up. When I left the coffee shop, I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. I expected rage. Instead, I felt clarity. Sophie's confession had answered the last question that mattered. Nathan hadn't destroyed my marriage. He'd stepped into cracks that were already there. The affair was the result, not the cause. Over the next several months, everything continued unraveling. Nathan's situation got worse, much worse. The company investigation expanded beyond expense reports. Former employees came forward, then former contractors, then a former assistant. The pattern became impossible to ignore. It was a long history of unethical behavior, more than enough to destroy a career. The executive who once walked into boardrooms like he owned them suddenly couldn't get anyone to return his calls. The business world was smaller than people thought. Word traveled fast. One afternoon, Rachel called me again. By then, we'd become unlikely friends. "Thought you'd appreciate this," she said. "I'm listening." Nathan interviewed for 3 management jobs. And he didn't get any of them. I wasn't surprised. Reputations take years to build, minutes to lose. Meanwhile, Rachel's life moved in the opposite direction. She finalized her divorce, started a consulting business, bought a small house closer to her parents. For the first time in years, she sounded genuinely happy. Sophie's story was different. She left her job shortly after our divorce. The attention she'd enjoyed for so long disappeared almost overnight. Friends who once encouraged her choices slowly drifted away. Reality has a way of doing that. About a year after our divorce, I heard something unexpected. Nathan had started dating someone new. 3 months later, she left him. Then another relationship failed. Then another. The same patterns kept repeating. No surprise there. People rarely outrun themselves. As for Sophie, I hadn't spoken to her since the coffee shop. Until one evening. A message appeared on my phone. Simple. Direct. She wrote that she'd been wrong about everything. Wrong about Nathan. Wrong about herself. Wrong about me. Then came the sentence that stayed with me. I thought confidence meant chasing whatever made me feel good. I didn't realize real strength was staying loyal when nobody was watching. I read it once. Then I put the phone down. Because for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel the need to respond. Some lessons arrive too late, and some apologies arrive after the damage is already done. 2 years later, I found myself standing in the exact same waterfront restaurant where this story had quietly begun. Not because I was looking backward, because I was moving forward. The reservation I'd originally made for Sophie's birthday had never happened. Back then, I'd walked through my front door carrying gifts and a cake. Now I was walking into a new chapter carrying something much more valuable: peace. A lot had changed. I'd accepted a promotion and started overseeing operations across several states. My career had grown. My life had grown with it. Most importantly, I no longer measured my future against a past that couldn't be changed. Halfway through dinner, my phone vibrated. It was Rachel. We'd remained friends over the years. Nothing more. Just two people who understood exactly what the other had survived. I answered. "Everything okay?" She laughed. "Actually, yes." "That's good to hear. I ran into Sophie today." That caught my attention. "Oh?" Rachel paused. "She asked about you." I smiled slightly. "Really?" "She wanted to know if you were happy." I looked out across the water. The sunset was turning the surface orange and gold. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." I waited. Rachel laughed again. "I told her you're doing just fine." We talked for another minute before ending the call. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I noticed another notification. A message. From Sophie. The first one in nearly a year. I opened it. There wasn't much written. Just a few sentences. She said she hoped life had treated me well. She said she was sorry. Then she wrote one final line. "I wish I had understood your value before I lost you." I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I locked the phone and set it face down on the table. No anger, no satisfaction, no urge to answer, just acceptance. Years earlier, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they didn't change anything. The truth was simple. The man who had walked into that house expecting to surprise his wife no longer existed. The betrayal had tested him. The divorce had hardened him. The rebuilding had strengthened him. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing validation from the people who hurt me. I finished my dinner, paid the bill, and stepped outside. The evening air was cool. The city lights reflected across the water. For a moment, I stood there looking at the view. Then I smiled. Not because Sophie regretted her choices. Not because Nathan lost everything. Not because I had won. I smiled because I finally understood something. The real power shift wasn't the night I caught them. It wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the consequences. The real power shift happened the moment their choices stopped controlling my future. I got into my car and drove away. This time, there was no surprise waiting for me at home. Only peace. And that was worth more than anything I had lost. Thank you for watching.